Je vais vous inviter à prendre place parmi nous et je voudrais en profiter sur ces quelques mots de conclusion entraînants parce que vous nous invitez à faire des choses extraordinaires dans nos organisations et effectivement ça donne envie et ça nous amène à nous dire mais comment on peut penser autrement, comment est-ce qu'on va réfléchir autrement et comment est-ce qu'on peut impacter plus. Parce qu'in fine, on a franchement la chance, nous, dans cette salle, de faire partie d'une élite qui a la responsabilité d'améliorer nos sociétés. Je voudrais appeler à mes côtés les différents intervenants. Je voudrais souhaiter d'abord la bienvenue à Madame Carol Kariuki, qui est le CEO de la KEPSA, Kenyan Private Sector Alliance. Thank you for coming from the eastern part of Africa and joining us here in Casablanca. Je voudrais saluer la présence et demander à M. Guy Baron, Chief Investment Officer du Rwanda Development Board, coming from Rwanda. Thank you, Mr. Baron, for joining us. Et je voudrais aussi inviter à nos côtés M. Lionel Zenzou, fondateur et managing partner de Southbridge. Bonjour à vous et bienvenue. Monsieur Zenzou, je vais vous faire une confidence pour commencer. Comme je sais que vous êtes très apprécié dans la salle, j'ai demandé aux organisateurs de vous mettre à côté de moi pour emmener une photo à la maison. En fait, vous êtes en quelque sorte, alors en général, quand on est de l'autre côté en Europe, on dit on est germano-rwandais, on est franco-nigérian, vous êtes afro-européen. Et votre dimension africaine vous habite en permanence où que vous soyez dans le monde. Je vais ouvrir la discussion avec vous. On parle de positive impact et on parle du rôle que les organisations doivent avoir avec les gouvernements pour améliorer la vie des citoyens. En Afrique, les attentes sont très fortes. Comment vous voyez ce sujet?
D'abord, merci pour votre accueil si chaleureux, si élogieux. Et merci aux organisateurs de m'avoir invité. Je suis très honoré de parler devant Son Excellence le Président de la République de Sierra Leone. On a des responsabilités comme chef d'entreprise en Afrique qui sont exorbitantes à celles de tout chef d'entreprise ailleurs dans le monde. Parce que nous avons une situation très paradoxale. Nous avons une croissance forte. Longtemps, elle a été niée, cette croissance forte. Mais en réalité, quand on révise les comptes nationaux, on s'aperçoit qu'il faut toujours augmenter. On l'a vu au Nigeria pour 89%, au Ghana pour 40%. Il faut toujours réviser à la hausse ce qu'a été notre croissance dans le passé. Nous avons une croissance forte, c'est désormais indéniable. Or, nous n'arrivons pas à régler un certain nombre de sujets sociaux absolument majeurs. Nous avons une très grande lenteur à régler les problèmes d'extrême pauvreté. Autant les classes moyennes s'affirment, et dans la salle, beaucoup des chefs d'entreprise ici bénéficient de cette extraordinaire expansion des classes moyennes, des capacités de consommation, des capacités d'urbanisation, enfin tout ce qui transforme la vie quotidienne de l'Afrique. Mais l'extrême pauvreté, c'est comme si on était encore dans une trappe. On a beaucoup de mal à sortir de l'extrême pauvreté. Et on a un problème encore plus lancinant d'une certaine manière, c'est que notre croissance est faiblement créatrice d'emplois. Monsieur le Président, vous en avez parlé à l'instant en disant qu'on a un devoir de créer des emplois dignes, des emplois à la hauteur des qualifications. Mais nous avons ce paradoxe qui est en fait un scandale. Plus on est qualifié dans beaucoup de pays d'Afrique, moins on trouve sa place sur le marché du travail.
Moins on est inclus.
Moins on est inclus. C'est-à-dire c'est l'inverse de la tendance mondiale où on arrive à, au fond, minimiser les risques de chômage et se créer une destinée personnelle quand on a la chance d'accéder à la formation et à la qualification. Dans mon pays, il y a beaucoup de gens qui ont une maîtrise de physique, une maîtrise de chimie, pas forcément une maîtrise d'une discipline au fond littéraire, une maîtrise immédiatement.
Pas une maîtrise de philosophie, mais utile.
Moi, je crois que c'est très important d'apprendre à penser, donc c'est important d'avoir des maîtrises de philosophie, mais des gens qui ont au fond des savoirs d'ingénieurs, des savoirs de scientifiques, et qui sont chauffeurs de moto-taxis. On a inventé les émigrants, les mototaxis dans notre région du monde, mais enfin, le fait qu'il y en ait 400 000, dont au moins le quart ont une formation supérieure, c'est un drame, en fait. C'est une injustice et c'est une tragédie. Donc, si les entreprises n'aident pas les gouvernements à considérer comment on améliore le contenu en emploi de notre croissance, nous serons dans cette situation alors que l'Europe commence à créer des emplois nets et à faire reculer le chômage dès qu'elle est à 1,2% de croissance. Nous pouvons être à 5, nous pouvons être à 7, nous pouvons être à 8, et nous avons encore un problème d'emploi des jeunes. Donc on a une responsabilité qui ne peut pas être portée que par les États. Il faut qu'il y ait une coalition des acteurs, une coalition et du secteur privé, et c'est un peu compliqué parce que nous avons un secteur informel très important, et du secteur formel, organisé. Et même, il faut s'occuper de façon très proactive du secteur informel, parce que sinon, nous allons réussir à avoir une forte croissance sans développement.
Comment est-ce que les États et les gouvernements, d'après vous, pourraient faire effet de levier pour qu'on transforme la relation entre l'entreprise et la société?
Si vous voulez, moi je crois qu'il y a...
Je vais aller jusqu'au bout de ma question. Je veux dire, comment est-ce qu'on peut le faire autrement que par de la réglementation, des contraintes, des lois? Comment est-ce qu'on le peut faire par responsabilité sociétale sur l'ensemble de la chaîne?
D'abord, il faut faire des forums de développement. Donc je salue l'idée de se réunir pour réfléchir à ce genre de questions ensemble. Et il faut d'ailleurs inviter les partenaires sociaux, il faut inviter les organisations non gouvernementales, les fondations, parce qu'on a besoin d'une coalition des acteurs. Donc il faut faire plaidoyer, au fond, comme disent les anglo-saxons. Oui. L'advocacy, c'est très important. Mais je crois que vous trouverez des chefs d'entreprise très ouverts à leurs responsabilités particulières en Afrique. Un signe, si vous voulez, c'est que même les financiers, je parle conscient du fait que je suis chez Tijari et que je suis un financier, même les financiers passent leur temps à réfléchir à ça en Afrique. On a désormais certains instruments, et je ne sais pas s'ils sont connus de tous dans la salle, et donc il faut en faire la publicité et le plaidoyer. On a des instruments d'impact investing.
Oui.
Au fond, on a des investissements qui ont des stratégies assorties non pas simplement d'objectifs de profit, comme le disait le président d'Almada, mais d'objectifs sociaux. Et en fait, il y a beaucoup de gestionnaires d'actifs dans le monde qui sont prêts à financer ce type de fonds. Et au Maroc, il y a des fonds de ce type, et il faut les multiplier en Afrique. Vous savez, quand des institutions de gestion d'actifs qui gèrent 2 000 ou 3 000 milliards de dollars disent « je suis prêt à mettre 0,5% de mes fonds dans des fonds de responsabilité sociale ou environnementale », ben ça fait quand même 10 milliards de dollars à 20 milliards de dollars. C'est-à-dire que ce sont des sommes considérables et c'est très important de voir que la finance évolue rapidement dans cette direction. Parce que la finance, à la fin des fins, ce sont les épargnants du monde entier qui en apportent les ressources, et ils sont parfaitement conscients qu'on ne peut pas faire une croissance débridée sans qu'il y ait des chances d'égalité et des chances de maintenir ou sauver la planète. Donc, de plus en plus, les épargnants du monde intériorisent ce genre de valeurs. Et vous avez également des mécanismes de finance, de crédit, au fond, qui comportent une composante importante d'impact. C'est-à-dire qu'au fond, vous associez à des objectifs d'entreprise, des objectifs où la rentabilité est essentielle, vous associez certains indicateurs sociaux. Et si vous atteignez ces objectifs sociaux, alors vous ne rembourserez que 80% de votre crédit. C'est-à-dire que vous aurez une bonification, un allègement de dette parce que vous aurez atteint des objectifs sociaux mesurables. Donc il faut créer des instruments de mesure. Et vous avez maintenant, au fond, ces facilités de crédit d'impact qui existent. Il faut s'en emparer, il faut le faire savoir, il faut s'en emparer. Donc il existe, vous dites comment on peut réconcilier l'entreprise et les objectifs sociaux, comment on peut rapprocher les gouvernements. Nous avons, en matière de responsabilité sociale, des institutions qui mesurent, des labellisations d'entreprises sur des ratings, si vous voulez, sur les considérations sociales et environnementales, et nous avons des instruments financiers pour appuyer certaines des entreprises. Il faut simplement s'emparer de ce thème et comprendre qu'il est parfaitement adapté à la situation africaine où, sans coalition d'acteurs, vous ne pouvez pas demander à des gouvernements qui prélèvent 15 ou 20%, pas 40%, comme dans les pays développés, 15 à 20% du PIB en recettes publiques, vous ne pouvez pas leur demander de tout faire seuls. Vous devez être en coalition des acteurs principaux. Et le secteur privé, là, il est absolument incontournable.
Merci beaucoup. J'aurais une dernière question parce que je n'aurais pas bonne conscience d'aller jusqu'au bout de la démarche si je ne le faisais pas. Ces questions d'investing impact à l'échelle mondiale, alors vous êtes un homme de la finance et vous regardez ce qui se passe dans le monde, mais vous regardez les enjeux de l'Afrique différemment de ce qui se passe dans le monde parce que vous êtes conscient, et on le voit à travers vos propos, de la sensibilité des enjeux sur ce qu'on doit faire chez nous. Ces questions sont venues après une crise financière où tous les financiers du monde ont été pointés du doigt. Et donc vous comprendrez bien que cette crise financière, nous on l'a subie sur le continent. Nous n'avons pas été acteurs. Et j'ai juste envie de vous demander comment ce que des financiers à l'échelle globale utilisent dans leur propre RSE pour être des citoyens assez corrects sur la planète, comment nous pouvons l'utiliser, nous, parce que nos préoccupations sont très terre-à-terre, elles sont urgentes.
Non, mais nous avons un droit, nous avons le droit de dire... Vous comprenez, nous ne sommes pour rien dans la crise financière de 2008-2009.
Exact.
Mais nous en avons subi les conséquences. Nous sommes pour rien dans la récession européenne de 2011, 12, 13. Mais nous en avons subi les conséquences. Nous ne polluons pas la planète.
Exact.
Dans mon pays, nous avons des émissions négatives parce que, comme dans les pays je parle devant nos collègues du Gabon et autres, dans les pays à forte, au fond, avec une forestation maîtrisée, nous émettons en fait, nous avons des émissions négatives. Et donc, nous sommes en droit sur cette planète de dire que nous pouvons et nous devons mobiliser des ressources adaptées à nos besoins. Nos besoins, ce n'est pas de demander au monde des leçons pour faire de la croissance. On sait faire de la croissance au Maroc, au Burkina, en Sierra Leone. On sait faire de la croissance, on sait en faire plus qu'en Europe. On n'a pas de leçons à demander en matière de technologie. Ça, c'est complètement nouveau. C'est-à-dire que nous avons des progrès technologiques assez impressionnants que nous allons pouvoir mettre au service de l'inclusion. C'est vrai dans l'agriculture, c'est vrai dans les paiements, ça va être vrai massivement dans le microcrédit associé, et Tijari est très en avance là-dessus, associé à des techniques de télécommunication qui font qu'on va solvabiliser les masses beaucoup mieux dans nos pays et beaucoup plus vite qu'ailleurs. Donc, on n'a pas de complexe, mais on a des droits. Et dans ces droits, on a ceux de demander à des institutions multilatérales dont on est membre et de demander à des gestionnaires d'actifs et de demander à des actionnaires sur le marché financier de développer les instruments qui désormais existent, mais ne sont pas encore suffisamment en usage, qui permettent de financer des entreprises en dette et en capital. Nous devons percevoir ça comme un droit des États africains. Nous sommes d'accord pour réparer la planète en matière d'environnement, même si nous ne sommes pour rien dans sa dégradation. Mais nous devons le faire avec les instruments qui le permettent aux États et au secteur privé. Nous avons des droits. Nous avons moins de complexes et de plus en plus de droits.
Merci, j'aime bien ça. Nous avons moins de complexes, de plus en plus de droits. Nous devons les exercer. Je vais à Carole Karaoke. Thank you, Mrs. Karaoke, for being a part of this panel. Maybe to start by simple things and let us more know about what about businesses and corporates in Kenya. What is KEPSA and how is it organized?
Okay. Thank you very much and good morning. Kenya Private Sector Alliance is the umbrella body of the private sector in Kenya, and the way we are organized, we bring together from the largest corporates, the multinationals, to the medium-sized, to the SMEs, and to the startups and innovators. So it's a whole chain. We have about more than 500,000 companies that are members of KEPSA, and this is in twofold. Some are direct members as corporates, others are associations. We have about 100 associations. So if it's a manufacturers association, the employers association, the bankers association, all those become members. And we've been existent for about 15 years now. Some of the associations have been in existence for more than 50 years. But it was actually the interest of the government in 2002. We had gone through a series of about 24 years when the economy really took a hit because of just the governance system then. And then the new government, when it came through a coalition. And then they felt that the mandate was going to grow the economy. And they said they cannot do that without the private sector. And they said, if we've organized ourselves as a political leaders and come together, business needs to do the same. And that's how KEPSA was formed. And we really engage with government in a very structured manner. We meet with the president at least through the presidential roundtable at least twice a year. We meet with the ministries, each sector. We are organized with the sectors of the economy. And so we meet with the ministries monthly, bi-monthly. And our focus is policy and regulations on the issues to do with the business environment. And I can give you a case in point, like one of the areas, what government says today is that the private sector is a partner of government in development. So government cannot do development alone without private sector. So the whole area of infrastructure, that means we have to work together. The area of ease of doing business, and a case in point, the last 4 years, Kenya was really not doing too well on the World Bank ease of doing business. We were at 136, and we worked very closely with government, and now we did 75 points up, and now we're at 61. We are the third in Africa, and now our work is to beat Rwanda and Mauritius, who are ahead of us. And we're going to do that. We said we have to be top 50 by the year 2020, and we're on track on that. And so the way the government looks at private sector in Kenya is that it's the engine of economic growth. And so we cannot look at private sector just as coming in, doing its thing, getting profit, and leaving.
Maybe sometimes we should consider this kind of rating useful to attract foreign direct investment. I can understand it. But the competitors are not always the neighbors. Maybe they are coming from other continents, maybe other places of the world. And sometimes maybe we can cooperate between Kenya and Rwanda to have better investment, international investment to share and to produce. We're going to talk about positive impact, and if I understood, you have 500,000 members in KEPSA. What is the revenue of KEPSA, and how does it come from?
The measurement, actually, the KEPSA is run by the membership.
Okay.
So it's the membership dues that run the organization. And our work is to ensure that the private sector in Kenya is playing its role as a partner to government in development. And so maybe I'll mention some of the things that the private sector is doing in terms of positive impact into the economy. And we call it the 3 Ps, profit, people, and planet. And the idea is that the private sector has to be sustainable. So we try and focus on the private sector. What does the private sector need to do? How does the private sector need to run to be able to be profitable and sustainable so that it contributes to jobs and wealth? Because every time we meet with government, the president says, where are my jobs? Where are my 1 million jobs this year? You know, so we know it's our role as a private sector to create jobs. And 90% of jobs in Kenya are created by the private sector. But then there's the people side. And I like a quote I read some time back that in the 20th century, the economy was run by government. But in the 21st century, the economy is run by the private sector. But what does that really mean? Is that it means that beyond creating the wealth and the jobs, there's a lot more the private sector is doing to be able to grow the countries. And in Africa, because we are a growing continent, so means there's a lot of more challenges and work that we can do. A lot of the things that the private sector is doing today was a preserve mostly of NGOs in the past and government, but the private sector has had to realize it has to play that role. Knowledge transfer. When we look at multinationals that set up in Kenya, we have a government law on what we call the local content. At least 40% of the jobs or the supplies have to go to the locals. And this is to build the local capacity. So, and like now we're building the railway, the standard gauge rail. We've done Mombasa to Nairobi, hopefully to get to Kisumu and off to Uganda and Rwanda. But as the railway, the standard gauge rail continues to move in the Belt and Road Initiative of China into other African countries, we do not want only the Chinese to come and build the rail. We want the Kenyans, where it started, to be able to go to Congo and to other countries and to build a rail. That means they have to be capacity building for these Kenyans to be able to do that. But also, we've been really getting a lot of the vehicle assemblies of the world to really come and assemble vehicles in Kenya and hopefully move to manufacturing. And again, we push them hard to make sure that they are setting up the technical schools for the locals so that they are trained, so they're not bringing only expatriates. And also the law in Kenya on immigration is that you have, even as a multinational, you have to have a plan on how you ease out the foreigners as they come into the company, and locals start taking up those jobs. So there's that training, but that's one. The second thing, what we are doing, and especially I see the banks are doing this very well, KCB, Equity, and others, is scholarships. They formed a lot of partnerships with Ivy League schools around the world, where they look at all these bright students from poor families who they sponsor to all these schools, and they run big programs on scholarship. Again, that's something private sector never did for a long time. A third area that I would also like to touch on is on SMEs. As I said, we have the SMEs as part of us. And the large part of the private sector in Kenya and most of Africa and most of the world is SMEs. But a lot of the private sector in Africa are very small SMEs. And what we've encouraged the big companies to do is to have the whole value chain. So instead of a company like as big as Bidco, which is an oil manufacturing company, edible oils company in Kenya, purchasing all the farms to grow its soya beans and all that, it organizes farmers and gives them inputs, trains them, and they produce for the farm. The organization also uses a lot of energy to be able to run the factories. Instead of also running its own bamboo forests, it gets different farmers and different local people to produce for it so that it can do that, so that you're always also growing those local chains. Another one is like Safaricom, which is the largest technology company in Kenya. They could open all manner of little shops around the country, but instead of doing that, they outsource that to the locals, the small SMEs, the small young people and women and people with disability to open these little shops to be able to do that. I don't know if you want me to give one more example around the environment. On the environment side, we're doing two things. The manufacturers have come together. The plastic ban, Kenya is one of the first countries to ban plastic bags in the world. And what the manufacturers are doing right now is what we are calling buyback of plastic bottles. And so they have set up all these places in the country and in around the retail shops to be able to buy back the plastic bottles as part of just reducing plastic in the country. We have the first boat that moved from Mombasa to Zanzibar that is made of plastic. And it's a case study that we can use plastics, we can recycle plastics. We're using plastics for tiles and, building materials and all that whole recycling, moving that. And we're running what we call the partnerships for growth, for green growth, so that private sector focuses on a lot of green growth, getting our private sector to be more involved in doing business in a sustainable, green way. So if you're establishing plans, what can we do in terms of recycling? How can it be green? How can we use green energy? So private sector is really moving to the place where it doesn't just focus on that. And then lastly, maybe on the political scene, again, we are a growing continent, and we are growing in terms of democracy and all that. And the private sector could sit back, but we felt strongly as a private sector that we have to be involved in that. And so as KEPSA, we've rallied private sector every time we've had the last few elections, rallied the private sector on peace campaigns. Again, a preserve that was done by the civil society for a long time. But we felt that political stability is important for economic growth. And so private sector can't sit back and watch when things are going wrong. And so we play a big role on that. And the war on corruption, again, we really have made our companies to sign the Business Code of Ethics that is based on the UN Global Compact. And that is to ensure that we are playing at the forefront of running the war against corruption with the government.
I can really easily understand that for big companies, multinational, very good organized companies, structured companies, this kind of issue is something that at the executive committees they can talk about, they can decide some strategies to deploy. I just want to come to the SMEs and very small companies, very small enterprises, and 500,000 members is an amazing number. My question is that 3 Ps, if I remember, are people, profit, and planet. How do you deploy this idea of preserving these 3 Ps and working for them at the same time at the lowest level of the pyramid? I mean, this huge number of SMEs and very small companies.
The same thing. I think it's not just the big companies. As I said, majority of our members are SMEs, because that's what the makeup of the private sector is in Kenya and many African countries. So when we talk about the profit side, we've been doing a lot of capacity building for the SMEs so they can run sustainably. If you look at most studies, they say a lot of the SMEs have a cycle of 5 years. So many don't live beyond 5 years. And so we've been saying we have to break that. So what do SMEs need? A lot of them is not just access to credit, it's affordable credit. So what can we do to get SMEs to have affordable credit? What capacity building do they need? So we've been running like a program we call with the UN called Switch Green. This is SMEs in agriculture and trying to capacity build them using the big companies to be able to capacity build that. So what we do a lot of linkages between the big companies with the small companies, so the small companies can learn and grow. We also have like a department in KEPSA, what we call the Business Hub, and here is where we really do a lot of capacity building of the small businesses using just the different instruments. We've worked very hard with on government to really push what we call 30%. This is for women, youth, and people with disability and SMEs, so that all government, 30% of government contracts go to SMEs. So the other thing we are working hard is at times government is slow in paying, and this really affects SMEs. And so we are really pushing on how do we make sure that SMEs are paid so that they don't lose their jobs. And then on the that is on the profit side. On the people side, these same SMEs, as they grow, we have a program. What we're doing. As you grow up, you mentor another one who is younger than you. And so we're trying to build those chains around SMEs so that the bigger SMEs are working with the smaller SMEs. And that whole thing of value chain, so the value chain is not from only the big companies to the SMEs, it's all different levels. So if you're a big company and you're outsourcing a certain level to another SME, the SME is also outsourcing to another level so that everyone focuses on something small, and also getting companies to understand about core businesses so that you're not doing everything. If you're an SME and you're in IT, you have no business maybe doing your own accounts. And so we have a program we run with the Ministry of ICT called Ajira. Ajira means jobs. And this is online jobs, because we're saying we're in the industrial revolution of technology. And so most jobs are going to be online more than the normal jobs we know of manufacturing. And so we are getting SMEs and others to understand that you don't have to do everything. You can outsource these jobs through online.
Thank you very much for sharing with us what your experiences and practices. I'm going to move now to Guy Baron. Thank you for joining us. You are the Chief Investment Officer of the Rwanda Development Board. In few words, what is the Rwanda Development Board?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. The RDB, the Rwanda Development Board, is the agency in the country charged with investment promotion into Rwanda, as well as development of the private sector in the country.
And is it linked to the president, to the government, to any minister? How is it organized?
As an agency, we report directly into the presidency.
And how do you work with other entities and departments and ministers for these important issues of investment?
Very, very, very closely. So again, the RDB is an investment agency. There's quite a few other things under the purview of RDB, such as tourism in the country, but essentially we work very, very closely with all stakeholders across government. So whether it's the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of ICT, Ministry of Trade and Industry, we work very closely with them on strategic investments, on key initiatives within very specific focus sectors. We work very closely to promote what we call local champions inside the country and existing companies. And so whether it comes to anything to do with implementation, with investment promotion, investment generation, is really a lot of that flows through RDB. We are not a policy agency.
Okay.
That really we leave to the ministries.
Thank you. We're going now to talk about this topic of positive impact. And what can you share with us from your experience in Rwanda in a process in which government, state organizations, private sector can work or have a model together for better impact on social issues, serving populations?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think in Rwanda we've got an approach that's worked well for us, and it's worked well in really moving the country forward. So when you look at the last 10 years, the country's grown at an average of 7%. And in order to accomplish the goals that we've set and the visions that we have for the country, it actually has to accelerate and have a higher growth rate sustainably for the next 10 to 15 years. So we have a heavy burden to continue to push the growth of the country. What's worked for us in many ways is a combination of governance, which really results in stability and predictability and transparency, together with an appreciation for the practicality of the private sector. And so what we've, I think, tried to do and managed to do sometimes, and we have improvement to do as well, is to really create an enabling environment from a doing business perspective, from a governance perspective, from a regulatory and transparency perspective that allows the private sector to come in and take the long view, to play the long game. And what that means is we very much prefer a model of partnership where the public sector, we think, can do a very good job with regulation, a very good job with measurement, a very good job of encouraging participation, whereas the private sector, frankly, is far more equipped to provide capital and to drive innovation in the name of profitability. So we think that partnership can work well. It's worked well for us. It does mean being able to have a level of organization and flexibility that can accommodate businesses being, should I say, on the radar, as opposed to sort of doing their own thing and preferring not to interact on occasion with government. We've tended to go the other way. And so I'll give you an example of that, where it's worked well for us. There's a company in Rwanda called Zipline. I'm sure some people have heard of it. It's essentially an American company that is the first commercial deployment of drones. And they focus on the delivery of blood and medical products to rural areas. And they had developed their technology, had developed their products, and really needed to test it. And came to Rwanda. We developed a framework and an aviation flexibility that would allow them to test the product, allow them to develop the technology, and it required a level of flexibility from government to allow that to happen with our aviation authorities, with our Ministry of Health, with our existing healthcare system. And together, they proved the product and deployed it in the field. And they took the time to deliver blood down from 3.5 to 4 hours to a typical medical facility in rural areas, down to half an hour, and reduced wastage from 6% down to 0. So it made an enormous difference in the lives of people. It's now been scaled and deployed across the country. And so that type of partnership, at least in our experience, has proven to be very effective.
Mr. Baron, all over Africa, when you have a new company that settles in, particularly in an area in which you don't have a lot of industry or economical activities, and particularly in the rural side, and rural part of Africa is, as you know, very important in our countries. The expectations from the populations are very high, and the expectations from the government and the rulers, even at local level, are always very high toward the company. How can we attract people to invest, to work locally, having this kind of impact? And we know that very often investors try to go invest in easy things with good margin, in good places, and very often in the heart of the urbanization. How can we work together with all the investors that can understand the opportunities, but it takes more time, and we have to build together, to co-develop together?
I mean, I think it goes partially back to what I was saying before, which is an acknowledgement that there is a willingness from government and a level of involvement from government that's productive and that's constructive and that's helpful to what private sector is trying to accomplish. And by the same token, a recognition of what creates value for the private sector. So, you know, I think it's really the combination of those two. I think doing business in our part of the world is really synonymous with social impact. It's virtually impossible not to. And the job creation, the impact on communities, it really goes hand in hand. And we obviously try to encourage that. So I really think it's that approach and it's that combination that works. I think there is a growing recognition of obviously the markets, the population sizes, the buying power, the potential of the continent, I think, continues to grow in terms of perception and interest, and the interest in coming into our part of the world is only going higher. You see more and more activity year after year. And so I think to be able to facilitate it, to be able to focus it, and to provide a sort of safe environment for that to happen really tends to be our approach. I think as Mr. Zinsou said, you know, when the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, puts out a letter that says we expect our portfolio companies to have a link between purpose and profit, the message is out. I don't think it's not a secret anymore, right? Or you know, the Boston Consulting Group put out a study that said companies that get this link between purpose and profitability correctly and impact correctly enjoy a 10 to 20% premium in their valuations. That's very, very important data that's extremely compelling for corporates and for investors to really take that kind of approach. And so we do think it takes both sides.
Thank you very much, Guy Baron. Thank you for coming here to this forum, International Africa Development Forum, and sharing with us your experiences, practices, and thoughts about this issue of positive impact coming from, particularly from Rwanda.